Hello, and a massive hello to everybody. Hope everybody's having a great weekend. This is 50 Pips, rocking and rolling, 7th of May, 2017. No trade calls and recommendations. Everybody responsible for their own stuff. We're here for educational purposes only. So, what's going on? Looks like Macron's won. Bank holiday in France tomorrow. What's going to happen? What are we looking for? Especially we get into a week here when we have the RBNZ on deck. We've got the BOE on deck. We've got a lot of US data, and we've got basically Japan coming back after 1 week off, right? Now, I don't think there's an awful lot to update on each specific chart. I think what's interesting is to talk about what are the main things we're focusing on, right? And one of the things we've been talking about is this, apparent continuing ramp up on equities, despite the fact that we're seeing signs of some funky action, right? You can look at Tesla stock, you can look at AMD, you can look at US Steel, you can look at retail, you can look at financials, etc. So basically, there's just some things that look like they're a little bit out of whack. And for us, the most interesting thing really is what's happening on the commodity side, right? So whether you're looking at, you want to look at something like DBC, right? Basically, you're seeing commodities very, very heavy, right? Trading extremely heavy, but especially, the big rolls down on copper, iron ore, etc., etc. So that's really the big interesting thing as far as we're concerned. Is this equity weakness going to, catch up to the market, or is the market going to be able to really just shrug this off, right? In terms of this commodity weakness, I think most people will be looking at silver, have been focusing on silver. I think a good reminder of showing you that, despite the fact that something is having a lot of negative closes in a row, even though it hasn't happened before, it happens rarely, it can continue to close negative, right? It doesn't have to bounce. But here, this is what we're going to be watching this week. Very interesting zone on the daily, extremely interesting zone on the weekly, right? If we're going to bounce, we'd expect this whole area going into the, this 1650 into this 1550 to be a potential bounce zone. We'll have to see how it behaves, but this is particularly interesting to us going into the week. If you're looking at GC, again, this is particularly interesting. Actually, we can get back on the daily. Move back down. How are we going to behave? Are we going to continue to move back down, or are we going to find some kind of base ahead of this 50 back on gold in line with this 100 DMA and this trend line? If we're going to bounce, this is starting to look like an interesting place for this to bounce, right? What's happening on the ZBs? Right, looking at the daily, you've got a lot of support coming in here. Big test, right? If we're going to bounce, this is where we got an open gap. This is where we need to bounce from. If not, they could start to trade very, very heavy, right? So that's pretty much what we're focused on. You can see that basically on the S&P, we're moving right back into these highs, and we're just hovering. So a lot of people, when you see this kind of closure, are going to say, what are the odds that we don't actually print higher? Most people are going to be looking for this to print higher. So the big test, I think the thing that would shock less people is to see those highs get tested. And the big question is, do we get follow through or do we not test them? But because in either of those scenarios, right, break above, no follow through, or we fail ahead, then these gaps are quite quickly going to come into play, right? You see the ES holding bid, YM, so basically Dow heavier. We've seen a lot of individual names holding very, very heavy, and the NASDAQ continues to be basically very, very strong, holding a very, very, very strong bid. In terms of DXY, what's happening on the DXY? So again, this is something we've been discussing in detail, and in the same way we discussed on crude, right, going into last week, we said it's all about this consolidation zone, and even though the healthy move is for a bounce, it doesn't have to bounce. It could completely break down, right? And this is what the DXY is trying to do. So we'd say we got now this 200 that is hovering here. This is going to be the line in the sand, right? any weakness, any hold below, any rally back into this level that gets sold, you'd expect we're still looking for this move to play out, right? Break above, you'd expect to move back into the 100. And probably the most interesting one is going to be on the yen as the Japanese come back after the holiday, right? You see a little gap up here. Are we going to hold? You see it's the same thing, this 100, right? You'd expect to see selling coming in as the Japanese come back in. So again, this is a big question. If we get daily closes above here, then we could easily see that ramp continue to get Momo. But if not, we would suspect that especially if we can't get a close above this level, then the path of least resistance would be at least for a move back down below the 112s, but possibly all the way back into the 109 zone, right? What's going on euro? Again, in terms of euro, the bigger picture, this hasn't changed for us. I'm not going to go through it again. We discussed it in detail last week. We're still looking for this to continue higher, so no big surprise. But the only thing I'd like to point out on a shorter term, in terms of a shorter term perspective is, again, don't forget that this gap is still open. It doesn't have to fill, right? But similar to the way we were discussing on ES, everybody's going to be looking for this to extend higher. So as long as it holds above this break higher here and above this descending trend line, there's very, very little edge to get short unless we move closer into this 112. But a failure to hold above here, then we could easily see a nice little move to try and fill that gap. And this is still hold the bullish rotation from much higher later on in the week, right? The other thing to look at is crude. We've been discussing crude. As we said, don't expect this doesn't have to bounce. This could break down completely. Our final targets in terms of primary targets was the 45. That's done and dusted here on this daily failure. Very nice little trade here. So now what we would be focusing on is how to behave, right? Any bounces that can be capped by this previous support acting as resistance, we would expect this to continue to hold heavy to ultimately print sub 40s. If we can break back above the zone, then we would not be surprised to see 52s come back into play. Keep in mind, as we get towards the end of the month, we got the OPEC meeting. We'll see a lot of headline risk, but unless something really spectacular comes out, ultimately we still expect that this is all capping, and one way or the other we're going to try and resolve lower. Okay, so again, there's not that much to add. If anybody has anything specifically they want to discuss, let me know. I'll try and review it, but we're pretty much stuck right here. I think most things are trying to play out. We just have to be a little bit patient. CAD, what's going on CAD? Before I forget, we talked about it last week, and we said once we broke higher, all these stops were likely going to get clipped in line with the weakness on crude, and that we expected this symmetrical move to complete. So again, we consider that move down, done and dusted. And now, especially if these highs hold, don't be surprised to see a retracement all the way back down into the 135s. That could still be for a bullish rotation. It's just the market moving in a healthy manner. But again, nothing too conclusive here. We have to see how the market positions into the open. We would expect any gains really to be muted, right, as terms, and pretty much everything was priced in on Friday. Crazy things can happen, but we still think the risk is probably of, buy the rumor, sell the news a little bit. Just healthy retracements, nothing crazy. And again, the most interesting for us is to see how the commodities continue to react and how the market deals with that. Okay, have an awesome one. Thank you so much, and hope to be able to do an update with more interesting things as soon as the markets move to more interesting levels and we get some more Momo and fall through. Have a great one. Thank you so much for liking. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that, and I hope everybody has a great week. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.